You have fallen into Event Horizon with John Michael Godier.
Today's sponsor, CuriosityStream, is Smart TV for your smart TV. CuriosityStream has thousands of streamable documentaries and nonfiction TV shows on topics like history, nature, science, food, technology, travel, and more. My pick for this week is from the Secrets of the Solar System series, and all about my favorite planet, Saturn. Go on a tour of Saturn with its majestic rings, exploring this jewel in the crown of our solar system. The film is an emotional journey of exploration told by the world's top experts, a magical space-based mystery tour, along with how Voyager was able to send back such exquisite photos of the ringed planet. Use code EVENTHORIZON to sign up, just $14.99 for the whole year. And keep in mind, with CuriosityStream's award-winning exclusives and originals, you are able to stream to any device for viewing anytime, anywhere. So use code EVENTHORIZON to sign up, just $14.99 for the whole year.
In today's episode, John is joined by James L. Cambias. James L. Cambias is an American science fiction and fantasy writer and tabletop game designer. He is the author of A Darkling Sea, and has been nominated for the Nebula Award, the James Tiptree Jr. Award, and the 2001 John W. Campbell Award for Best New Writer. His newest book, The Godel Operation, is science fiction at its sense of wonder best. A wild chase through the billion worlds of the 10th millennium in search of a mythical weapon that could save civilization or doom it.
James L. Cambias, welcome to the program.
Glad to be here.
Now, James, you have a new book out, The Godel Operation, which is a space opera, or the first installment of a space opera. Can you give us a teaser before we get into the concepts therein?
Sure. It is a hard science fiction space opera, and it is about a artificial intelligence and his favorite human chasing across the solar system in pursuit of a mythical superweapon which could save civilization or destroy it.
Now, let me ask you this. We are on the cusp of artificial intelligence, true dangerous artificial intelligence. One can sit there and project forward 50 years and see some scary stuff. What's your view on the safety of artificial intelligence? Should it be something that we should pursue, or pursue limitedly, or make off limits?
I think we should pursue it, but I think it's a lot further away than we tend to think it is. When you consider everything we call machine intelligence and machine learning now is really just better ways of executing tasks that are assigned to computers or artificial intelligences by humans. We don't currently there is no computer or software anywhere on Earth now which can even begin to conceive of the idea of taking over the world. And there's certainly none that can choose to do so without somebody's telling it to.
Right, and that's the big thing is, could you ever get artificial intelligence to the level of a human brain that can make its own motivations and actually execute something like that on its own? I often wonder if we do get towards a generalized AI, if it won't do something completely unexpected and, for example, shut down. It might conclude that there's no point in existence and just simply shut down. So every time you try to create a generalized AI, a sentient AI, it just dies. So do you see any sort of possibilities that it could be that unpredictable?
I think you're correct. I think it would almost certainly be that unpredictable. And in fact, the idea of that since an artificial intelligence would not have our biological hardwired imperatives to remain alive and reproduce, and thus to, let's be candid here, sometimes fool ourselves into ignoring philosophical issues, I think perhaps you're correct that an AI might hyper-logically examine issues of existence and meaning and decide, no, I'm off.
Yeah, or enslave the entire human race and force us to build it a gigantic rocket so it can launch itself into space and seek seek the optimum low temperature for computing. Now, in your book, the AI, which is one of your main characters, alters memories. How does this happen?
Well, I'm assuming, I mean, remember, the story takes place near the end of the 10th millennium. So it takes place in the year 9986, I think. And it's, I'm assuming there has been more or less continuous technological progress. There's a few setbacks along the way, but there's no dark age in between. So pretty much any manipulation of matter can be accomplished by sufficiently advanced tools in that setting. So the story begins with my two protagonists, Daslak, who is the narrator, who is a kind of snarky artificial intelligence, and Daslak's favorite human, a young man named Z, who is a very direct and honest and forthright young man. And Z is having the same sort of existential crisis you and I were just talking about for AIs, except that he's a human. And so the ruling AI that rules the space habitat they live in decides to fix Z's problem by just giving him some memories that will give his life some meaning, in this case of a bittersweet doomed love affair from his past. And I figure if you can manipulate matter at the atomic level, you can move people's brains axons around. Once you understand how memory works, it should not be difficult to create false ones. The process, I don't describe it in too great detail in the story, but it does take a little while, and I'm assuming that's because you would require to manipulate a human's memories would require some literal physically rearranging of the axons in their brain, right? If you're going to give somebody a false memory, you can't just zap them. You're going to have to go in there and rewire the switchboard.
But you have nanotechnology, which could, in principle, have that capability, right?
Oh, I'm assuming that's how it would be done, yes.
Now, that creates an existential crisis then, because you can't ever tell if your memories are real. How do you address that in the book?
Well, I mean, it takes quite a while. We're given a little spoiler here, but Z's memory of his lost love affair is one of the drivers of the plot, because Z reacts to it a little in a manner that the AI had not anticipated. And so it takes quite a while for Z to realize that these are false memories. On the other hand, again, it's not a huge earth-shattering revelation moment in the story, partly because there's so much else going on, but also because I suspect it would be the reaction at that point in history, after this has been, again, people have presumably been able to do this for thousands of years. So when you discover, oh, those were false memories, damn it, somebody's been messing with my head.
Now, generalized AI in a future scenario, and you don't have to go into the details regarding the book, but just in general, generalized AI could also be one of the greatest things we ever invented, potentially. So it could do a lot of harm or a lot of good. Do you think it skews either way? Do you think it's if we pursue this, it'll integrate itself into our society and make everything better, or it's just too risky?
Um, well, I personally think that because it will be a more difficult task than we think it is, it will take longer and thus be more. We will have more time to integrate it into our social structures and figure out how to deal with it. I don't think the nightmare scenario of some supercomputer somewhere waking up one day and taking over the world is how it's going to happen. I think, there will be steady incremental progress over a very long time, because we still have to understand we can't really create artificial intelligence until we understand what intelligence is, and we haven't really got that nailed down yet. If you talk to psychologists, neurologists, etc., not to mention philosophers, the definition of human intelligence is still kind of fuzzy. So until we understand what makes us intelligent, I think it will take us a long time to develop a machine that is intelligent in the sense of having volition, which is, I think the key. That's what we mean, I think, when we talk about AI, really, is a machine capable of deciding to do things without somebody telling it to. Yes, that could absolutely be a huge danger. In my novel, one of the incidents in the distant past, in the fourth millennium, is a genocidal war between the artificial intelligences that live in a ring around the sun and all biological life in the solar system. And it's a damned close run thing. I'm not going to spoil, well, I mean, obviously, since it takes place in the past, obviously the AIs fail to annihilate all life, but there's how it happens and how that war is brought to an end isn't because the humans simply triumph by virtue of their human pluck and ingenuity. It has more to do with the other side deciding not to bother anymore.
In regards to AI, now there's the other side of the coin. There's humans going from the natural to the technological. What are your views on mind uploading?
I have as a science fiction writer, I have unfortunately the disadvantage of being married to a scientist who studies, among other things, neurology, and so I can't as easily believe in brain uploading as some writers who come from a computer science background. A brain is not, except in the most general metaphorical sense, is not a computer. And I don't think there's ever going to be a way to install a port in your head that will allow communication directly between your brain and any kind of digital data system. Neurons are not digital. So I suspect brain uploading, if it were to happen at all, would have to be a very brute force approach of essentially a giant model of your brain in some data space, where presumably some sort of giant three-dimensional array where each cell in the array maps to one of the cells in your brain and talks to other cells at other points in that array by the rules that brain cells connect by, and thus by mimicking the function of your brain could presumably mimic how you think, unless it turns out that you have an immortal soul and the church was right, in which case you just have a simulation of a piece of meat. And I think that would be the only way to begin to do any kind of upload of a human mind. And that still, I'm afraid, is not going to allow the cool stuff that all of the rapture of the nerds, techno singularity people seem to hope for, where you can put your mind into cyberspace and then upgrade it. Because if your mind upload is essentially a model of your brain, you can't very well just download the latest patch and hit the update button and expect to get improved functionality from it. You would essentially have to figure out improvements to your brain architecture in order to make you smarter or whatever. So I suspect actually that we may wind up with generalized machine intelligence before we can do human mind emulation.
Well, that would stand to reason, because if with the AI, as you mentioned, we're starting from known technology and extrapolating that way. Whereas with a human brain, for all we know, and this has actually been mentioned seriously by several scientists, Paul Davies included, that maybe there is a quantum mechanical function of the brain. And if that's the case, then we are centuries from ever understanding it, which means that we would never get to the mind uploading stage, because it just isn't, the universe doesn't allow it.
Well, and also just any machine which is capable of emulating the functions of simulating the activity of a human brain would very much by definition be of greater, shall we say, processing capacity than that brain itself, right? You need a bigger processor to run a simulation on by definition. And so it seems to reason then that if you can build something that can duplicate the activity of a human brain, you have a computer powerful enough to be intelligent on its own, although see my previous comments about figuring out what we mean by intelligence.
Now, yeah, and the other question too is that, human brains all work very differently from each other, sometimes so differently that they're disordered. So you've got that, do you automatically transfer sane? In other words, could you get some sort of technology related disease, a disorder of the mind, just simply by uploading?
I would imagine that would happen quite a lot at the beginning of the process anyway. And that's also, if you think about it, something that would be extremely difficult to test, right? Because obviously you would want to test your brain uploading with animal subjects first, upload a mouse, upload a dog, upload a chimp or whatever. But until you are simulating a human being by whatever means of uploading you believe feasible, until you're doing that to a human, you don't have a subject which can tell you, yeah, it went perfectly well. I feel just like I used to. You can't ask the chimp. And so, your first, you can do all the proof of concept you want on other mammals, but at some point you're going to have to upload a human and then find out if it worked. And the scary thing is, I find it would require a great deal of effort just to make that scan, and I'm not sure it would be possible to do it non-destructively. So your first attempts to make an emulation of a human brain in software form might require the destruction of that brain. So it's sort of like who gets to be the first person to test the transporter, right?
Well, that was definitely a theme in Star Trek, the transporter psychosis and things like that in the early days of transporters, that it was messing people up. Now, let's go to the near future. We seem, I'm a science fiction author as well, and we look at these sort of far future scenarios, but it can sometimes be harder to see the near future. With all of with the human race essentially sitting on the cusp of the commercialization of space exploration with SpaceX and Blue Origin and all that. What do you think of that? Do you think that this current period is realistic? Do you think that Elon will found a Mars colony, or do you think that this is just something that seems too early?
I don't know if he will successfully found a Mars colony because, and this is going to sound a little hard-hearted of me, I don't know what there is on Mars that's worth that can produce a profit, because that has always been the urge behind every colonial project in Earth's history, with a handful of exceptions. You have to be able to make money when you go. The history of the Jamestown colony in its early years was, I think, very appropriate. The Virginia company dropped a bunch of people off at Jamestown, and they spent several years scrambling around to find something to make the colony profitable. One of their earliest projects was a glassworks. And I think that literally came about because they're looking around them, on the Virginia coast, and they see, well, we've got a lot of trees and there's a lot of sand. Maybe we can make glass, And it wasn't until they found tobacco, it's like, oh, look, here's an addictive substance we can sell back home. Our colony's future is assured. That the colony really took off. And it will be instructive to see if there are any resources on Mars that are profitable after you ship them back to Earth. I wrote a game supplement years ago for Steve Jackson Games, GURPS Mars, and I spent some time and talked to some people about what would be profitable resources from Mars. Mars's geology, areology, is such that a lot of the processes that on Earth have concentrated resources may not have been happening, or at least not to as great a degree, right? So on Earth, most of our metal ores, for example, are the result of concentration by water-driven processes, water leaching minerals out of the primordial rock, which then gets concentrated when the water evaporates, and you get tectonic activity then exposes that again, so that you'll get seams of iron ore or seams of copper ore or whatever. And I'm not sure you would have that on Mars to the same degree. However, I did talk to a geologist friend who pointed out one resource which probably could occur on Mars and sounds really cool is diamonds, because diamonds are not formed by biological processes. Diamond pipes apparently originate very deep. I think it's below the Earth's crust. I think it's in the mantle. So these are, eruptions of primordial carbon, and Mars has plenty of primordial carbon too, and used to and may still have volcanic activity. So some enterprising wannabe Cecil Rhodes should go prospecting on Mars for diamonds, because I'll bet there would be people on Earth willing to buy a genuine Martian diamond.
Well, just initially, there are people on Earth right now that'll spend a lot of money for a genuine Martian rock, because of the.
I would.
Yeah, I mean, we have Martian meteorites, or meteorites strongly suspected of Martian origin. They are not cheap. So you've got that, but that would be a novelty thing, because eventually you end up with enough Mars rock. But with diamonds, that's different. And one thing interesting about the diamonds is that we've actually found extraterrestrial diamonds in some of the iron meteorites, where they have graphite inclusions and deposits, and they've actually found diamonds in them. So it happens. They're not very nice ones, though, unfortunately. Meteorite diamonds are not, they're industrial.
But so while Mars, I think, may wind up being a little bit of a dead end, I think other near-Earth objects may prove to be much more valuable. One of the biggest, you've probably heard this before, that one of the biggest near-term space resource markets is simply providing propellant to satellites in geosynchronous orbit. If you can refuel satellites in geosynchronous orbit cheaper than hauling fuel up from Earth, and if you can mine near-Earth objects and recover hydrogen and oxygen, or perhaps even synthesize other chemicals, if you can bootstrap that up into operation, then you have a ready-made market for people who are perfectly willing to pay you to refuel their communication satellites. And that's a big-ish market, and that's one where I suspect we will see in our lifetime relatively soon. And in my novel, one of the economic hubs of the entire solar system is Deimos, because energetically, Deimos is as close to Earth geosynchronous orbit as Earth is. It doesn't take, I think it takes less energy to get from Deimos to Earth geosynchronous orbit than it takes to get from Earth to Earth geosynchronous orbit. So Deimos, becomes the commercial hub of the solar system fairly rapidly. And then, of course, once they build an elevator to connect to Mars, then they can make use of all of Mars's resources at relatively low expense. And so one of the features of that future is that there's this long-standing sort of codependence, but also hostility between Mars and Deimos.
That would also open up the asteroid belt. I mean, if you can colonize and use Deimos as a hub, there would be other strategic asteroids that you could use too, right?
Right, yes. So Deimos is close to, in energy terms, close to Earth orbit, but it's also close to the asteroid belt. And, if you can make use of gravity assists from Jupiter, then it becomes entirely feasible to engage in very long-term resource extraction projects in the outer solar system. The weird thing about when you start looking at the solar system in terms of energy rather than distance or whatever, the outer solar system is closer than the inner solar system. It is easier to get to Jupiter than it is to get to Mercury. And we've seen this with recent space probes. You can send a space probe to Jupiter a lot more conveniently than you can send a space probe to Mercury.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Event Horizon. Now, between you and me, this interview has given me a few ideas. John? Oh, I wonder where John is. Perhaps he went to the store to buy more beard-related paraphernalia. We'll be back next week. Bye!